That is the most joyful of the sessions, I bet, because after such a wonderful Viennese lunch, nobody wants to work. That's why there's a coffee machine in the room next to us. Get as much caffeine as wanted. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ilya Yablokov, and I'm one of the co-organizers of this really inspiring and interesting workshop. Thank you all for sending your abstracts. And we are starting the second or the last part of the day with the third panel, which we call Weaponization of Climate Change Denialism. And we're going to have three presenters. We'll start with Gulbin Ates, who is currently a postdoc at the University of Sheffield, as it happens. We have a great since we are running a little bit late with um, than the initially planned. So we are going to have 20 minutes per paper. And then we're going to have questions and answers, and hopefully we will finish more or less in time for Peter's keynote. Right, Gulbin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. As Mr. Yablokov told, I'm a postdoc researcher in University of Sheffield. And thank you for inviting this presentation. My topic is Turkey's climate change denialism in political rhetoric. And we know the media has tremendous effects on individuals on climate change. And this study focuses on this. And the aim of this study is to analyze ideological components in Turkish media against the climate change denial, disinformation. And these debates, anti-Westernism and how they contribute to authoritarianism. And the hypothesis of this study is climate change disinformation is a way to criticize the West and determine Turkey's position on global issues. And this can be related as the support of authoritarianism in Turkey. And climate change deniers contribute to creating a complete image of consequences of the climate change. So individuals become less likely to support anti-climate behaviors. It leads to environmental skepticism. In this study, we are trying to understand the prominent climate change denial political actors rhetoric in Turkish media, as these figures affect the public discourse and change the attitudes. So in this study, television, YouTube programs, and articles are investigated with content analysis, frame patterns, and hypotheses the climate change tied to ideological positions. Turkey approved the Paris Agreement in 2021, and according to Konda, research team in Turkey, the climate change perception in Turkey 2024, 70% of people in Turkey are anxious about climate change, and this is a relatively high portion, and believe that climate change is the result of human actions. Anxiety about climate change increases with education level, and it decreases in correlation with conservatism. And according to the 2024 climate change report of Copernicus, 2024 year was the warmest year in record of global temperature, and it was the most strong heat stress days included. After Turkey's agreement on Paris Agreement 2021, it's expected that Turkey will provide and legitimate a national climate law, but it also increased the arguments in Turkey about this climate law, and it cannot be brought to Grand National Assembly of Turkey. And it also shows, according to the Konda research, that climate change perception law, the climate change law, is not well known with Turkish citizens, despite their anxiety about climate change. So without enough back action, disinformation about climate change can be dangerous, and people's um, actions may not be voluntary. So we want to understand the deniers' actions, deliberate actions, and what are the consequences of them. First of all, climate deniers' actions are streamed as lie of climate on traditional and new media, and this leads to uncertainty about the climate, and people may believe in unscientific facts about climate change. In this study, we are going to discuss about far right and far left wing climate change deniers rhetoric. Beginning with the far right wing rhetoric, they are exposing these ideas like climate change by city and environment powers, naturalness and harmlessness of climate change, and it's not causing a risk, attributing the natural disaster like forest fires to malicious intentions rather than environmental factors. And this attribution people's increases people's anxiety about the future, and also the simple explanations of climate deniers decrease the importance of personal contribution. The second group comprises far left-wing politicians. Most of all, unlike the first group, this group does not deny the existence of climate change or global warming, but they question global climate legislation, and they assess that climate change policies are tools by Western powers against Turkey, and they want to prevent Turkey economically. And they think big companies should be discussed rather than ordinary citizens about the climate change. By if we give examples about these discourses, there are one of the prominent figures of far right, this Abdurrahman Dilipak, and it's, as you can see, he talks about starts his rhetoric with COVID, and thinks that Turkey should not lead the Islamic world about climate change laws, and he sees Western world behind the issue. He also addresses the religious apocalypse or revelation of John or Bible issue. With another discourse, he thinks Bill's meant Bill Gates, he means making the decisions, and it's a lie. It's a natural process about the climate change. He also links it to transhumanism and Neuralink. He thinks there are devils in angel masks, and for a generic, well-known conspiracy mentality, he thinks they are trying to create a new world order with the ARP technique or RF techniques. He thinks they are making the deaths of bees, fish, or birds or by themselves. That's not about the climate change. Also, he addresses to international organizations to blame, like World Health Organization, and he sees this World Health Organization dangerous than the domestic terrorist organizations in Turkey. Like we have talked in the morning, he thinks that they are trying to make people eat insects, and they are trying to um, transform the individuals independent of religion or morality or tradition or general biological sex. He sees it's also a collaboration of Bilsman and European Environmental Agency, and WHO. They are all working together to force Turkey to climate change law. Also, there is another figure that was also talked in the morning. Fatih Erbakan, he is the party leader of long-term party, and he says it's a Zionist project and it is exaggerated, And he says not the climate, global warming, but in fact, global cooling is dangerous, which is an important rhetoric about the disinformation about climate change. When we come to the far left-wing climate change deniers, we see Doğu Perinçek. He is also leader of a minor party in Turkish politics, and he says it's climate change is a myth created by America, and America does this because America's economy is got worsened, and it wants to correct it, and he thinks that the West, America and Europe, is working against Turkey's agriculture and industry. And the target is developing countries like Turkey. And he also disinforms people about the carbon print, that carbon is not a bad thing. We all need carbon. So here we see with two opposite political ideologies. One is far right and other is far left. They reached to a consensus about climate change on the basis of anti-Westernism and thinks climate change is all Western hoax. So the peculiarity of Turkish climate change deniers that they are most likely to be marginal figures, and Dilipak or Perinçek is not the mainstream political figures, but they still have effects. And also, despite the consensus of Western media on scientific explanations of climate change, Turkey still experiences from both left-wing and right-wing thinkers, despite their marginality, denying the climate change. Thank you for listening to me.
I think we have time for immediate questions. Gülbin, please.
So maybe I can
Yeah.
start. So thank you for the presentation. We, like in our research, we were mainly dealing with the first guy, like Abdurrahman Dilipak, because like when we did this ethnographic fieldwork that in their meetings and like kind of a social movement ones. So he was one of the figures who acts like a hero, like climate hero, who is waking up people. So I'm more used to, like, I'm more knowledgeable about his part, like what he's saying. But I'm less knowledgeable about the like far left's climate change denialism. So could you recognize the reactions to his discourses? Because what we observed was reaction to Abdullah Dilipak's group, let's say, not like specifically to him. So this like it can be a nationalistic or like political Islamic discourse, but so like the reaction to far left's denialism or obstructionism. How, like, what did you see? Did you see anything, or if you do, what did?
In fact, they the both far right and far left in Turkey about the climate change share both anti-Westernism and share the nationalism, and their difference, I think, lies in their, for example, Abdurrahman Dilipak's conservatism and lies and religious sentimentals, because in far left's climate change denial, not most likely to happen religious references, but far right wings always tries to imply that there is something about deteriorating the religion, and their focus in terms of the economy or the traditional values change, I think. For example, Dilipak or far right thinkers focus on the negative effects of climate change movement about the tradition and losing the tradition. But far left wing thinks that they are more economical observation, I think.
Okay.
Any more questions? Okay. I suggest that we have all the rest two papers delivered now, and then we're gonna have the floor open for questions. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So our next presenter is Cornel Hirsch of CU. Please, Cornel. He has a great 20 minutes.
Right. Hi, everyone. Just to briefly reintroduce myself, my name is Connell Hirsch. I'm finishing my master's here at CU this year in international relations. I've had the privilege of having Dr. Ekind as my supervisor, as well as my mentor over the past about almost 2 years since I've been here, as well as Dr. Shakostov has also been guiding me. So I'm just incredibly grateful for this opportunity to speak about my research today. So my title is of my paper, Weaponizing Climate Conspiracies: How Petrostates and the OGI Utilize Conspiratorial Narratives to Bolster Climate Disinformation. So in true research fashion, I will be amending this title because I did end up somewhere quite different from where I initially thought I would when I first proposed it. Instead, I proposed a bit more of a theoretical framework and a philosophical framework, frankly, through which to view these conspiratorial narratives. Let's see. The first one, yeah. So I'm just going to begin first with the research question that initially inspired this paper was, why are conspiracy theories so prevalent in climate disinformation? So I was really curious to investigate the psychological factors specifically behind conspiratorial belief and to try and elucidate the potent rhetorical connections that I observed in my other research and addressed why conspiratorial language and rhetoric specifically is so relevant and prevalent in this kind of disinformation. And so my second research question that I developed through this project pretty much related to why is there a discrepancy between conspiracy theorist believers in the developed versus developing world. And on top of that, so what can this tell us about the specific narratives that target these differing regions and states? So my methodology for this research was to basically just verse myself as much as possible in the clinical psychology literatures of conspiracy theories to discern specific characteristics of conspiracy theory believers, and then apply this to my other work in discourse analysis and examples of climate disinformation grand narratives, which serve, I argue, as distinct overarching veins of specific denialist disinformation. So I posit that climate conspiracy theories' salience differs between developed and developing states due to these discrepancies in these narratives, and I argue this is not an accident. So I advance actually a philosophical lens and theoretical framework through which to view and examine the global North narrative specifically as an example of Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist bad faith argument, insofar as I argue that climate denialism represents a form of bad faith as a reaction to the overwhelmingly existential nature of the climate crisis. So in contrast, I contend that the dominant grand narrative in the global South, and also just segueing right from yours as well, is that basically that this plays upon that climate change is a Western hoax that is trying to prevent the global South from developing, and that this plays upon the dark legacies of colonialism, as well as a separate existential fear that developing states will never be allowed to achieve the same kind of wealth and prosperity as the rest of the international community, and that the climate disinformation is deliberately strengthened and employed to achieve these ends. So basically, I will begin with, and what really serves as my literature review throughout this whole paper is basically just discussing what I found as the most prevalent psychological factors and characteristics of conspiracy theory belief to build context for how it relates to the disinformation specifically. So the literature purports that believers have this intrinsic need for what is known as like autonomous epistemic agency, which is effectively a predisposition and an intrinsic, a tendency to obtain and piece together pieces of correlative evidence that helps build a particular lens through which to view the world. So I'd like to indicate a discrepancy which I label between conspiracy theorists, who are definitively believers of often multiple interlinking theories. These people are much more active and much more likely to make contributions in the forms of evidence in order to enlighten others, particularly on like message boards and whatnot online. And in contrast to this, the lesser version of conspiracists I would label as conspiracy curious or casuals, because they typically only believe one or two really popular theories, and they're far less likely to contribute these pieces of knowledge, especially online. And these individuals I observe are usually much more the targets of climate disinformation because they're not fully in the rabbit hole just yet. Typically, conspiracy theory believers associate unrelated or anecdotal evidence with intuitive observations that allow them to build these alternative realities, which may provide them with satisfaction or what I would argue is existential comfort. So much of this collecting is done through a kind of game-like fashion. So collecting pieces of evidence, often through the internet, which are almost always just pieces of disinformation, which have been disseminated for this very purpose, usually by malignant actors malignant actors such as petrostates or the various oil and gas industries in certain countries and their subsidiaries, which ultimately is in order to protect their financial interests. So, let's see. So that's my first one. So the literature identifies three main theaters through which conspiracy theorists derive their beliefs. So the first would be epistemic, and epistemic discovery refers to this practice of finding causal explanations to contextualize an inherently satisfying understanding of the world. This is typically fueled by what is described in the literature as overwhelming disconfirming evidence, which is usually some kind of variety of disinformation. These are often speculative insofar that they posit actions that are hidden from public scrutiny. So they're complex by postulating a coordination of actors. So whether that be a cabal of evil scientists or globalists or lizard men, just take your pick of boogeymen, really, whom use stealth and some kind of stealth to cover their actions. And this implies that those who try and debunk these conspiracies are in fact in on it. And then therefore this creates like a positive feedback loop, because if you're trying to debunk this, if you're a scientist, you're perceived as being in on it, and therefore it just kind of feeds a cycle. A related property is that theories can protect cherished beliefs and therefore reinforce these sentiments, and by utilizing this conformatory evidence. So literature is quite resolute in this regard that these sentiments are experientially heightened and exacerbated when events are large and significant in scale, especially when individuals are dissatisfied with mundane and small explanations. Furthermore, research suggests in itself that this belief is stronger when individuals express distress as a result of feeling some kind of uncertainty. So therefore, climate change, which is overwhelmingly distressing and complex, is the perfect candidate for this type of belief because it represents a problem so overwhelmingly complex and frightening, the likes of which our species has never had to contend with before. So additionally, conspiracy theory beliefs have been established to have a strong correlation with distressing, anxiety-inducing events, and it's stronger in individuals who have experienced significant personal trauma. So the second theater is that of the existential. When considering that climate and vaccines are basically the most prevalent theories, it will come at no surprise that believers are more predisposed to this adoption when they feel a sense of existential dread or fear. So this study, if you haven't, most of you might be familiar with it, but basically it took a sample of Russian tweets in Russian discourse, and it pretty much proves that I would say the most common disinformation out there, like the most likely or to if you're just a casual believer, is either going to be climate or vaccines. So the reason for this is many early theories about conspiracy belief itself purported that individuals turn to belief as a form of compensatory satisfaction due to perceived threats to themselves or to exert some kind of control over their environment. So other studies indicate that belief is strongly related to a perceived lack of socio-political control. And the inverse is, of course, true insofar as that belief propensity is lessened when individuals feel a sense of control over their outcomes, especially in a socio-political context. However, ironically, the subject matter of conspiracy theories can have this very paradoxical effect, in particular identified in the political realm. So if individuals feel that there is this secret cabal of group of scientists or what have you that have control over society and subsequently their lives, they're far less likely to engage in empowering or autonomy building activities such as joining political organizations, or especially like exercising their voting rights. So I identify this paradoxical effect as a possible reason that disinformation is crafted deliberately using conspiratorial narratives, because it is in the petrostate and OGI interests in order to disincentivize democratic actions by the public, which may threaten their profits. Thusly, a connection exists between conspiratorial rhetoric and a tangible disempowering effect, which I argue has significant political implications. So finally, the final realm is social. Scholarship suggests that those in marginalized groups are much more likely, if they feel ostracized in some way, to, especially even within their own families, they're much more predisposed to this belief. So specifically those who perceive themselves as political minorities or political or economic losers, they are much more likely to believe this. And on top of this, there's a very strong correlation, I would honestly argue, probably getting closer to causation in this regard, between populism and conspiracy belief. Specifically, so in particular, these beliefs, like in things like deep states or shadow governments, they create further distrust in these institutions, especially when they're governmental. And this further inspires disenchantment regarding politicians and scientists. So examples of this would include individuals that work specifically in the petrochemical industry. Their livelihoods are threatened by the perceived threat of decarbonization. Therefore, they are predisposed to adopting conspiratorial beliefs because they believe there's this malevolent force that is determined to take their jobs and to further enrich themselves at their expense. So in particular, identify that these narratives which target the global South are actually potent in multiple social facets of conspiracy belief. So firstly, identify that in the sense of basically due to the horrific legacy and distrust due to colonialism, that oftentimes there may be distrust with global North scientists and institutions, and basically the idea that they don't have the global South and these people in these countries, that their best interests at heart. And the second, I would refer to more so the ostracization within an international context. So specifically that climate change is an excuse used by richer and historically powerful countries to exclude developing states from attaining the same wealth and prosperity that has been enjoyed historically by the global North. Evidence of this may be found in the mistreatment and the manipulation of natural resources perpetrated by powerful global North states in the South. And the main example that I thought of when I was coming across this was, of course, what is happening right now, especially in Africa. So simultaneously being exploited by China, Russia, the United States, lots of states in the EU, in particular regarding lithium and cobalt and these new resources that are, at least at the time being, integral to creation of EV batteries. So moving on from this, so I would like to forward specifically how the psychology pertains specifically and how it interacts with the disinformation. I would like to forward the study conducted by Van de Cruz et al.'s 2023 theory of the epistemic arc. So this meta-study hypothesized two key inferences. Firstly, that epistemic discovery is an essential component to conspiracy belief. And second to that, they purported this model of discovery for believers, which they entitled the epistemic arc. So I build upon this by arguing that it exemplifies why climate disinformation is particularly potent and rhetorically charged with conspiratorial verbiage. So the curiosity, the epistemic arc consists of three steps, right? So there's initially this active curiosity, or what I would contend is a curiosity driven by fear or a rejection of the climate reality. And this is combined with the epistemic act, which is usually a Google search or an incorporation or exposure to disinformation or some kind of pseudoscience. And this eventually produces your subjective insight, which effectively creates a piece of evidence in the theorist's mind that serves as a building block for their alternative reality. So the initial act of curiosity is a rejection or a fear of the overwhelming threat that the climate crisis represents. This provokes them to engage in the epistemic act to investigate an alternative to this, which pushes them into the open and waiting arms of duplicitous actors who have primed disinformation, ready to suggest them a more favorable and palatable alternative, which would be the disinformation. These two steps together combine to confirm a more desirable reality, completing the epistemic arc and ultimately arriving at our subjective insight, which the believer takes as confirmation of their intuition. What makes this additionally notable is the fact that it's been established that subjects exhibit significant overconfidence in things like internet searches and knowledge creation. They perceive it as creating knowledge themselves because they believe they've discovered something basically by themselves. And because of this, often they've really just encountered disinformation, which suggests an appealing alternative to them. So I add to this specifically regarding climate due to the complexity of science as well as the widespread misconception that basically weather equals climate. And I chose this particular, just a little bit. I chose a specific example because I've observed this, especially over the past couple months, in particular with the United States. And basically, I chose this example in particular is because within climate conspiracies, weather equals climate, and therefore that current weather events that are happening right now in front of us must equal something about climate change is unfortunately incredibly widespread, and it's kind of exploded, especially recently, due to this very particular phenomenon. So in addition, so the literature, let me just find myself here again. So I added this specifically that the complexity is that real science, right? It's incredibly complex in nature, and it's inaccessible a lot of the time to non-scientists. And this creates a type of intellectual elitism, which elicits a response from a conspiracist's social instincts. Therefore, conspiracists are more likely to feel marginalized by the scientific community, which further pushes them to search for alternative data, which is published and institutionally established. In addition to this, the literature establishes that internet searches are perceived as more valuable or factual because it exemplifies this illusion that they've discovered something unique or hidden. And so effectively, it elicits this false sense of discovery, mostly because these concepts are counterintuitive and counter-institutional. In particular, what I want to describe, and with this phenomenon in particular, is in particularly like the southern half of the United States, we've been seeing, because of the destabilization of the polar vortex, what's been occurring is basically as cold air gets started pushes very, very far south, what's ended up happening is that people are, basically, if they're predisposed to any kind of these beliefs, especially in the winter, in places that are traditionally very hot, what's ended up happening is because the cold air is coming so far south, people in these regions that never experience normally like any kind of climate or like any kind of cold weather, they're going outside and they're seeing like snow in certain places and thinking to themselves, okay, climate change cannot possibly be real because look at it outside, it's cold out, or it's snowing in Florida, or like these things that have never happened before. And ironically, it's because of the destabilization of the polar vortex. But of course, combine this with their preconceived notions that they've gotten from the disinformation, it's just solidifying what they already think that they believe in their intuition. Okay, so I'm gonna skip a little bit around here. Going to skip my slide there. Basically, so the theoretical framework that I want to advance basically plays upon the Sartrean, I would say, argument regarding bad faith. And so bad faith effectively refers to within an existential, all right, so basically, starting with, I would say, the existentialist, let's see here, but just 5 more minutes, is it? Yeah, okay. All right, so effectively what I want to argue today is I agree this is a bad faith argument in a sense that Chartres, when he fully first developed this theory, effectively what he said was that within existentialism, like the universe is meaningless and it has no inherent meaning, and therefore we create ideologies, whether it be organized religion or something that distracts us from this reality, right? We create these things so we can sleep better at night, etc. So what I wanted to posit is that climate denialism is a type of bad faith because it is an inherent rejection of everything that we are trained to believe as humans, or like something that I would say that we look at like the way that we view the world, and it's an inherent rejection of that just because the climate crisis is so complex and overwhelming and terrifying that we want to live in this bad faith. And so therefore I purport that that is a representative of this. And in particular, I found a study that basically it creates this very satisfying rationalizing explanation to what is ultimately a very disturbing and existential threat to both us and our planet. So I argue that conspiracists and casuals are predisposed to preferring to believe that climate change is not real, and so that it is a grand conspiracy by some kind of global or governmental elite because it offers this neat and simple and more reassuring explanation for a ridiculously complicated problem. Let's see. So I argue that this is preferable to believe that climate is a hoax. Climate change is a hoax because it is invented to, I don't know, for example, in the United States, a really prevalent one is like take your car away, right? Take your autonomy away. All these associations with freedom are basically being taken away by some kind of global elitist cabal that wants to ultimately take your freedom. So finally, I will just end with the two dominant theories basically that, I mean, I'm really paraphrasing here, but two main theories that I would argue is that in the global north, that climate change is this hoax created by some kind of global scientist, cabal that is supposed to restrict freedoms essentially, whereas it differs in the global south because instead it's a global hoax that was created by the global north or the west in some way to prevent developing and non-Western states from developing and sharing within these gains. So in particular, final study that I wanted to really discuss today is the main discrepancy that I found between all these states is if you can look at basically the age bracket on the very top, is that disproportionately only the global north and like only these developed states that was conducted in this study, only these countries had basically young people disproportionately believing in climate conspiracies. And so initially that was really counterintuitive to myself because I thought, okay, why is it that young people are not believing in this? We literally were educated about this in school. We have all these resources. We're much more aware of this crisis. I don't understand it. And that's precisely why I advanced the Sartrean framework, is that because it is a purposeful rejection of climate change, because I argue that on top of this, when you consider other sociopolitical factors that young people are facing these days, I would argue that all these things kind of bleed in together and create a sort of apathy. And so therefore, because, like job markets, owning your own property, all of the like legacies of neoliberalism, I would argue, are so potent in young people's minds that they can't handle something like climate change because it's just too depressing to deal with. And it represents other political factors that are all kind of like accumulating together. And then so I would argue that in contrast to this, it's not necessarily as potent. The signifiers are not as separate from one another in the global south and these other states, because frankly, I don't believe that, when there's less strength of institutions there. So I think that's like a big factor that plays into it. But in addition to this as well, finally, I would argue that especially if you look at like Africa, for example, there are certain states that have picked up the majority of the slack that was left by basically like the EU stopped like buying Russian oil during the invasion, excuse me. And so because of that, I argue that a lot of time you see a lot of Russian disinformation specifically, they are now really pushing disinformation in Africa in particular, trying to say that, okay, the West is just trying to prevent you from developing. This is not, this is just a hoax. Please keep buying our oil effectively. And so finally, I want to just end with, because this paper is frankly quite theoretical, and I didn't really have the resources at the time to go out and conduct my own study, I wanted to identify what I think are potentially really fantastic case studies that might be studied in the future. One in particular I'd be really interested to see would be India, because they've had this kind of semi-quasi developing and industrial state status for a long time. And so therefore that's give them exemption from emissions treaties. And so because that's basically changing now, I would be really curious to see like, okay, how is it working there? How, is this particular myth or is this particular line of climate reasoning, is it going to be prevalent there? I would hypothesize that it would be, and then some other ones as well. Mostly, I would actually really curious to see, especially after the Romanian elections and the very, very prevalent disinformation in the election. I'd be really curious to see how exactly that would interact with the new Neptune, I think it's the Neptune Blue project that they're trying to launch, I believe, in just the next couple of weeks to go start drilling in the Black Sea. So yeah, it's pretty much my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Connell. Thanks. Right, and our final speaker on this panel, Serge Polikov, who's a PhD student at the University of Passau. Serge, please, the floor is yours. 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Here, hello everyone. My name is Serge Polikov. I'm presenting this research that I'm doing together with Yulia Klink. It's more like a side
project from my main research, but like let's start and I will go to the details. So basically, we've talked today a lot about disinformation, and what is interesting for me and what I'm like studying in my PhD is the disinformation production industry, which is represented by a unit mostly known as a troll factory. So I'm studying Russian troll factory. So names are troll factories, cyber troops, digital black ops, digital mercenaries, disinformation for hire. Here a bit like theoretical distinguish between astroturfing, that astroturfing is a kind of like tool that they use, but disinformation for hire or troll farm, it's a kind of like this organizational environment in which this appears. So we are looking to organize astroturfing and organized mostly by the state or some entities close to the state. So it has been found in China, Philippines, Turkey, Brazil, South Korea. It's the ones that like evidence is enough to produce some paper, and that is like in 81 of countries in different regime types, from liberal democracies to autocracies. We will be focusing on the Russian case over here. So on the QR code is my paper on Evgeny Prigozhin's troll farm, which was known as the Internet Research Agency, which is not completely correct because as I found in my paper, but it's not a secret, everybody knew it, but not unfortunately not academic community. So it got dissolved into the Patriot Media Group. And after the death of Prigozhin, it was shut down. But even before the death of Prigozhin in 2019, it started losing competition to much bigger organization, which much broader amount of tasks. It is Anno Dialogue. It's some like non-profit organization very close to the state, connected to the presidential administration, which has offices in almost all of the Russian regions and also in temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. So they are doing this like troll farm job, but it's just a part of the business. They basically monitor of the social media, teach people how to produce content on social media, but it's not the point of this presentation. Point of this presentation also VK. VK it's used to known as Vkontakte. It's Russia's largest social network site. It was developed by the same guy who developed Telegram, but right now it has strong links to the Kremlin, and these links are getting stronger and stronger, and it belongs to the part of framework of Ghost Digital that Russia is now developing. So here, Anno Dialogue is basically connecting with VK on organizational level. And here, propaganda have a very big reach to the audience, so not only through the news content, but also through other type of content, such as entertainment. So here's QR link to the paper of my co-author about that. So here in what I'm showing you today, we are using database of Botnadzor activist projects. So it's an activist from Russia who started to do all the monitoring of bot and troll activities. They have own set of algorithms. So we relying on the definitions of trolling and on the algorithms to find bots and trolls. Algorithms are unfortunately undisclosed, but we are in a contact with them, so that is understanding, and we are thinking about the ways of validate this. So what they do, they basically monitor all of the most of the news groups VK. So here you can see some symbols of the war, of SVO, like Russia called it. So basically, they monitor not only news communities, but also some biggest in the communities that post any kind of information. so we have an access for this database. So we have a sample period from 1st of August 2023 to 1st of August 2024. They have about 1 million of 1 million of posts over there. Here we selected random sample from keywords to 200 of posts for each keyword. So it's a climate change, global warming, drought, and forest fires. After removing posts that are not related, we got a sample of 348 posts. So in the first step, we categorized discourse in the posts. So 2 quarters, grounded theory. So we found 4 most categories. It's climate change denial, foreign policy, Russian issues, scientific information. Here I need to note, after listening all this presentation, more or less tone of speaking about climate change is not serious almost in all of the categories except of the Russian issues. So only when they and also foreign policy when something bad happening. So theoretical concept of climate change is almost consistently presented with some kind of humor. So let's see how Russian trolls go to the comments to this post and how they try to shape discussions over there. So first one, the climate change denial. The most many posts with this funny news about the Denmark want to have a part tax for the cows, and here the commenters start joking about it, so I will tell you which comments are from the real people and which one are by the bot detected by bot.zero and trolls. And also I will note that some of the comments looks not authentic, even if they still not captured by bot.zero. So here, yeah, the first comment is joking about this. Here, some people start bringing up some old research, and this account looks like maybe deliberate troll or maybe automated troll, but he's posting similar stuff in different communities, but not detected by bot.zero because there is no political agenda over here. Some people are actually thinking of maybe we should stop cutting down forests and switch to environmentally friendly energy sources. And some people are bringing political topics as well. We have to help Ukraine somehow, but the money is running out, so they decided to tax farmers, idiots. And Klaus Schwab and some conspiracy theories videos. They are posted mostly by this kind of accounts that deliberately created for posting this conspiracy stuff. And here is only one comment of the bot that we found over this post. Is this kind of research they are doing in Europe? Are they trying to prevent global warming that could happen because of coal farms? So they just trying to break a relationship between what's written in the post and like to look at this different way. Here, it's a typical activity of the bot. So like you don't have to read this whole post. So it's basically kind of like news about Canada that conspiracy theorist who was believing in climate change was burning forests to prove that climate change exists. And here is typical activity of the bots and trolls. And I need to say that bots and trolls most likely connected with this no dialogue because bot.zero have a map of activity of the trolls in Russia. And this regional map is matches somehow map of regions where no dialogue is presented. So they start promoting some federal services of Russia over there. So they do this kind of like more or less classical astroturfing when they promote some government services over here. So they promote Rossельхоз, which is trying to solve a problem of illegal lodging. Foreign policy. So here we are. We started with Ursula von der Leyen has blamed Russia for climate change. And what happened in here? First one, of course, like overall, the topic of the bots is they trying to attach Ukraine to almost all of the conversation. So first one is she linked too much or did Zelia? It means Zelensky bite her. And real commenters starting to go to this conversation, converse with them, trying to add to these jokes. So here are. Overall, we see that in foreign policy, the not detected users by Botnadzor are more or less in the same stance. So Ursula von der Leyen is called Granny or Auntie. And then it's very this account looks authentic. It's a real person. Apparently, it's a photographer, and he is saying that until we show them a nuclear button, they will always do this. Next one, it's actually kind of like a comment on this. So here's the spokesperson. Maria Zakharova is of Russian Foreign Ministry is reflecting to this stance, and here we have conspiracy theories. So this account came and said that Sky is seeded with satellites, starting posting some videos also against Putin, and at some point of time, it's because it's a long conversation, but it's funny that at some point of time she's saying, and what is this anyway? If FSB and FSO, it's like Russian security services, are watching VKontakte, why didn't they block it? And they posted a video of Ukrainian Russian speaker blogging. What's here trying to, like, when Russia is in the post, because bots and trolls probably working algorithmic, they try to kind of like whitewash Russia. So Russia will be accused of everything. We control the climate and move the axis of the earth. We can do anything. So here's a bot account on this conversation. And then few more bots accounts, Russians are everywhere in the voices and the head. And Ursula hasn't said yet that Putin has a climate weapon. So here's a Forbes, and here it's written that drought has reduced capacity of Panama Canal. And as I said, when conversation about climates related to some events that's more or less real, conversations are a bit different. So here we see that a real person says the climate is changing, and funny that bots are coming and saying the world faces enormous challenges and we haven't even learned to live in peace with our neighbors. So it's kind of pro-peace bots. In order to realize that Russia has something to offer the world and the world has need for it, some time is needed to abstract from what happened and to evaluate the events that took place. So whitewashing of Russia, it's most of presented topics of what's I'm talking about. So Russian issues, here it's kind of interesting. So Redovka, it's a media which is connected and actually it's working now under umbrella of a dialogue. And it's a post about forest fires. And it's one of most interesting posts in a sample because most of the comments under this post are written by the bots detected by Botnadzor. And they all kind of like condemning it. Just a shock. I can't even imagine what's left there now. I hope victims will be able to recover quickly from the fire. And only one not detected user says are the ears of winemaker, wine grower. Becomes like the top sticking out here. So again, like some maybe like criticism of local elites close to conspiracy. So one more. So here is about snowfall, and here again we have conspiracy theories. Then we have some memories from the past, 2001, May 12th, it was snow in St. Petersburg. This one looks not good, so this guy was talking about snow in St. Petersburg in summer of 1970s. But interesting again that bots are coming here and saying actually that there is real anomalies. So the snow fell in Texas in 2021, and it was really an anomaly. And it was some conversation with this guy. Again, it's like, yeah. So basically, he's repeating it. And scientific information, it's category when they spoke about how scientific facts about climate change, and here we see that again the main thing is extend to the NATO. It's not bots, and bots here. It's interesting because they also detect anti-regime bots. So here the quality of life of country is being reduced by dictatorial regime. And then bots, when that is happening, that is always fights of the bots. So here they are saying that in Russia they support Putin and are happy with their life in the country. So one more here. Here, first time they speaking about Russian gas. So again, that climate change is an existential threat, and bots saying that Europe has abandoned Russian gas, and once again firing up coal-fired power plants. So conversation in this matter. And real people saying soon to pensioners of superpowers will solve this issue with the help of red buttons. Idiots. When you pensioner in charge, I decided to end my presentation with this. So next up, it's basically in-depth analysis of comments, qualitative analysis of the comments with AI and sentiment analysis by bot, not bot, Discord strategy, and qualitative analysis of case study. Monitoring of climate ecology related events, because we can attach this post to the database of activity eco protests in Russia, for example, and then we can see not the post with the keywords, but posts happening after the events, and following the petro resources discussion. And limitations that we have in that sample, only bots and trolls detected by bot-nadzor. Initial analysis shows that is bot troll activity undetected by bot-nadzor, but there is also organic troll activity. But organic troll activity, I mean there is some fake accounts, but they probably run not by the somebody close to the state, or not run by some bot farms, but just the people who are into trolling, so they just troll for themselves. And it does not include domestic climate discussion in small niche communities, apart from presentations that we heard before. So, and in general, I will end on the note that I found when I've been reading this, I found some of the places in Wiki are really funny, because it feels like 1 year ago we've been talking at the conferences about that internet will be a place when AI talking with another AI. So here there are some places in Wiki when you really feel that either bots, like interstate bots, are talking with AI, or other way around, but it feels that authentic discussion is not exist over there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Serge. And yeah, we have roughly 25, 30 minutes for the question and answers. I think it's very decent time. Please. Peter.
Thanks for the brilliant presentations. I would just have one question to Serge, and it would be about how you partially touched upon that, but there is a rather big debate in the literature on how important Russian trolls finally are in guiding conversations. How much is the real impact? And we know, I can just recall this story that emerged after the doppelganger scandal, when it practically turned out that when the doppelganger scandal, when is this Russian disinformation scandal in Europe, when it was uncovered, they tried to sell even to the Kremlin and to the foreign ministry as a way of success. That look, the Guardian wrote that there is a Russian disinformation operation. So they paint it as a success. So they are highly interested in overestimating their own impact for obvious reasons. This is what they got the money for. And some authors, Peter Pomerantsev, for example, says that it's not that important. Some others, researchers at Indiana University, say that these Russian troll factories have rather a strong impact on guiding public discourses, even shaping attitudes and so on. So, what's your point on that? Is it more of a balloon, or is it something important, or in between?
To contextualize, actually, this doppelganger, it's connected to the same dialogue that I've been talking about here. So this is new company. But as I said, like trolling is not the main business over here. So dialogue do much more than trolling. So that's why we are focusing here on this. But that's a very big question. And that's what I started to talking at the end of presentation, that this discourse in VK at all doesn't look authentic. It's like it's a big rubbish can when you are reading it. But from number wise, we see that it's most popular social media in Russia. That some people might be just reading and not commenting, but even when this kind of read appears, when they go to comments, for example, topic of Ukraine is always appear. So that's why it's kind of like it's not at this moment, especially with introduction with AI, it's kind of like quantitative, not qualitative propaganda. So I guess it's just to have some hashtags to be attach to all of the news. So basically, importance of Russian trolls right now switching to other functions of this organization. So that's why actually Prigozhin with his troll factory, which was doing mostly just comments, he lost this competition because on a dialogue that I'm researching as well. So these organizations, they do monitoring of almost all of the Russian social media. They do analytics based on this. They also kind of like conquering these places by creating groups for all of the facilities that are somehow related to the state. So for all of the schools, kindergartens, theaters. So they have this special law about gospublic. So that's why if you live in Russia and live everyday life and you want to be in social media and I don't know, like your kids are going to the school or you want to go to the theater, you somehow being touched by this dialogue infrastructure, and this infrastructure is very powerful, and it has been used at least once already because after the Prigozhin mutiny, most of the channels connected to dialogue posted a video address of Putin. So meaning that people who haven't been reached by this video address by television could be reached by this dialogue network. But the task now is not persuade and not propagate, but rather have people in this infrastructure which can be mobilized in a case of need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. More questions, please, Danny.
So, I have a question for you. Your theoretical paper. There was a concept that you mentioned early in your presentation about these conspiracy casuals. I think it's an interesting one. How do you feel the rest of your framework, your theoretical framework, which I presume is mostly focused on the pure hardcore conspiracy believers? How do you feel this framework fits within these conspiracy casuals? Do they fit anywhere in that?
So what I would say is actually for most of the disinformation that I've observed and like the narratives that I've observed through like other research, I think that it is actually much more posed towards these casuals, right? So like people who are, like more hardcore into conspiracy theories, they're much more likely to believe in multiple at the same time. A lot of times they have like, very interconnected narratives, especially like in the globalist context, or like, you know, blaming things on this like global cabal of whatnot. Whereas like if you look at these casuals, right, people who are most likely, almost always, they just either believe in vaccines or climate or both, and usually nothing else apart from that. So I would argue that a lot of this disinformation is actually posed like directly and targeted at them. So I think that it really, like, my framework more so contends with them, if anything, because like I think it's, I mean, of course, like within the philosophical lens, it would be, okay, these people are making this choice, right, to believe this, right? Like they're making this active choice. But I think it's a subconscious choice ultimately at the end of the day. I think that they're primed and they're pushed towards this, like in this direction specifically, because they have witnessed disinformation online. And then also, so like other things, like this amplification effect, right? If you see multiple people saying something, especially on the internet, depending on like if it's basically like, you know, most conspiracies and like also most disinformation is disseminated by like politicians and like public figures, right? And like also, you know, like RT, like specific news outlets that like, you know, are not necessarily trustworthy, right? But they have the air of ethos to them, right? They have some kind of credibility. And then when you see that relayed and you see it amplified by other people on the internet, specifically like, you know, people in comment sections or people on social media in particular, and the more that you see it over and over, I think the more likely you are to subscribe to these ideas. So in that sense, I think that it is really powerful and that it really does convince lots of these people who are not fully in a rabbit hole yet, right? Who, you know, generally do still believe in institutions. They do generally still trust things, but the needle starts being moved the more that they see these things over and over again. And then I would argue that combined with the fact that climate change is so existentially overwhelming and just so terrifying that, you know, I think it is if anything, it's a cognitive survival instinct, right? Like evolutionary base that, you know, this is so overwhelming, this is so terrifying, therefore you know, it must be true, right? It must be. And then also like you combine, I would argue, it's like other anecdotal evidence, right? Basically like, oh, it's cold outside, therefore global warming isn't real, you know? So I would say it's more so actually like more salient with people who are more casually believers.
Thank you, Connell.
I also have a question slash recommendation to Con also.
Sorry, can you speak up, please?
Yes, sorry. I also have a question slash recommendation to Con also. I'm very sympathetic with this sort of epistemic arch that you drew up. And if your goal is to understand patterns of the data that you presented on the last slide, then you don't need Camus and you don't need Sartre for it, really. I mean, I'm sympathetic towards them as much as the next Eastern Europe, really. But there are existing psychological theories like the Nobe effect, for example, that would allow you to make better predictions and to make this point a little bit clearer. And on the other hand, it seems that they are making you to make predictions that are a little bit iffy. So conspiracy theories are not really simpler explanations. They're different kind of explanations that we seemingly have a preference for. But for example, take conspiracy theories around immigration in 2015 in Europe. So there was one explanation saying that there is war in the Middle East and people don't want to stay there. And there is another explanation saying that George Soros wants to ship illegal migrants to Europe in order to undermine Christian. This is not a simpler explanation, but we seemingly have a preference for it, perhaps because it makes us feel more in control. And the other thing is they are also threatening conspiracy theories. So they're not really existentially comforting. I mean, some of the things that you have described, for example, that these people are afraid that some shadowy global elite is going to take their rights away from them. This is not existentially comforting at all. I mean, it's still threatening. It's just a different type of threat.
Yeah, I think yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Because I think yeah, my specific utilization of the word simple is probably wrong. I think the reason I more so chose to use that was simple in regards to compared to actual science, like hard sciences that people, I think, like a lot of, you know, conspiratorial thinkers, I think they not necessarily reject it, but because they don't fully understand it. That's why I'd say that like it's more simplistic in the sense of like it's not truly existentially comforting necessarily, but it's simpler in the sense that like it's easier to understand than hard science in that ivory tower. So yeah, I do understand. Yeah.
And you can make the argument that we're doing bad job as scientists to explain things.
I would make that. Yeah, I frankly would, because I mean, I don't think that science is very accessible sometimes, and I think it is really it's but not just you know hard sciences, but political sciences, all the sociological, everything is as well. I think it is really difficult there's a huge disconnect in the way that people on the street perceive, you know, politics and how their governments works and how policy works and how we in academia and also in other fields who really study these things every day. And like, I don't think we do a good job of communicating it. I think there is a barrier between sort of intellectual arena and just regular people. So I think, yeah, I would say that as well.
I may use the opportunity as a moderator and kind of to have a follow-up question to Carl. If you're looking at these individuals, groups of individuals as conspiratorial casuals, don't you think that you are stripping them of agency? In the sense that anthropological research into conspiracy theories does show that people are actually very proactive, right? Their beliefs are not just based on what someone says, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you say they're casualties, they've seen it, so they started believing that. So you kind of simplify them. Do you think it's right?
Yeah, so I think I would just more so refer to again like that sort of like natural discrepancy, right, between the people. So like, yeah, of course, in literature, people who are like quite hardcore into this, like they are really curious, right? Like that's what's established over and over is that they are looking for something, right? Like that's usually why they become so entrenched in these things is because they I mean, they believe that they've, stumbled upon something new and something different. Oftentimes, I do think it is, most of the time, it is some kind of, not disinformation necessarily, but, something that is inherently counterintuitive or counters the institutional narratives, right? And so therefore it gives this illusion of it being of being new and then therefore being fresh to them, and they think they've stumbled upon something, and therefore it's solidified in their brains. Whereas to I guess like my other point with like the casuals is that no, I don't think that these people, I don't think they're very much agency. I think that they are being pushed into certain narrative holes or like into certain directions by things that they see online and by repetition of other things that they see online in particular. When they see, for example, like someone in not necessarily like mainstream media as much. I mean, I'd say like the main exception to that would be in the United States, like Fox News, is how, you've seen like lots of climate conspiracies have been pushed on that network for a very long time. So you see someone iterating that like there. And then so like a casual viewer, when they like observe something like that, they will take it, kind of at face value all of the time. So yeah, but frankly, I would say that, yeah, lots of these casual people, right? Like, I don't think they employ very much critical thinking skills. I don't think it's their fault necessarily. I think it's a institutional and educational failure at the end of the day. But I'd say, yeah, no, I don't think they're very agentful, to be honest, because it's reflected in their voting patterns. It's reflected in many of the ways that they behave, in the way that they, perceive other things, whether they be political or other social issues. So no, I think the whole sort of like evil beauty in the disinformation is that it is crafted specifically to push people in a certain direction because it is preying upon them not wanting to go out and contest this thing that they've read or check the source of the thing that they read, etc. Of course, like the people who are more hardcore into it, they are more predisposed to do their own research, to like look for things. But that I think is a different phenomenon. These people who are more casually into it and like are kind of swept up into it, I think it's because they see something that's enticing that agrees with maybe an intuition they had or something anecdotally that they've observed. I think that's more so what I would say explains it. So no, I don't think they have very much agency, frankly.
Okay.
Just maybe a little bit provocative question to Serge. So what is the whole point of this bot farms and users and so on? Because on the one hand, they kind of form the opinion, or at least take part in this forming of opinion in a country where public opinion doesn't actually lead to political consequences. And on the other hand, if they're engaging in these conversations and dialogues between real users and them on Contacte or on the Classroom in Facebook, these users are already probably politically engaged in some way or another, or at least they already have their opinions, because if you still write on political matters on Facebook and so on, they probably already have a specific political opinion about things. So what is the whole point of it?
Yeah, that's like that's why actually like I decided to apply here and to choose the climate as a point, because it's kind of like safe topic. It should be so safe topic, but we see that it's not. So that's a bit of a problem, because like if we design the similar research and choosing political issues, we would have this in predisposition. So who would be writing about political issues in Wiki right now? So it's going to be either trolls or people who are supporting the narratives. So that's why like idea was to go to this like to climate as a safe topic, but we see that how fast climate change also not unthanks to the troll, how fast climate change to the politics, I mean to the war again, and then there is no real conversations as well. So that's why maybe there is a sense to make one more trial with these like local ecological communities and local ecological protests to see. But in general, yeah, the main point is that like the discussion is dying over there or even over the safe topic. So I guess if we go to if we sample recipes for cooking, we might find similar results.
Gulbin, I have a question to you. Again, when we look at the scholarship on conspiracy theories and beliefs in conspiracy theories, quite a popular concept is powerlessness. So people tend to believe because they cannot change something. And you're talking about the left and the right sort of camps and how they find themselves, how they frame climate change in the world. Can you speculate, or maybe you know the exact answer, to what extent the idea of this climate change denialism is related or correlated to the ability of these political movements change things in their own country?
Specifically, the marginality of these movements. Yes, it can depend on the marginality of these movements because I think they are more ideologically powerful according to their respectively representativeness in this society. Both the examples in our study shows that they have bigger plans for Turkey, differing in their ideology, like maybe most powerful country of Islamic world or the most powerful secular country in the world, but they want their ideology, their ideological group, and the Turkey to be the pioneer, but they want to, I think, see some enemy, and their enemy, their other, is now Westernism, whether the topic is climate change or anything. So they focus on this powerlessness. So they found the guilty one, the enemy, as Westernism on these topics, I think.
But then in other sense, they also have similar views on domestic politics with the ruling regime?
Not much. They don't have. They don't share. They because the first one, far right one, shares the common ideological history and the shape of the current government, but have criticized the government on some issues like Istanbul Agreement or Paris Agreement, climate. But the other group is constantly in opposition to current government in Turkey.
Thank you. We've got 7 minutes left. Any more questions? Yes, please, Timon.
Follows up from your question, Ilya. I'm sure there's perhaps Connell and Gulbin might be able to respond. But I suppose it's what question is what happens when conspiracy theories move from the disempowered fringes to the mainstream and even the norm. So, I mean, we all know that over 50% of the American population have just elected a president whose first policy is to dismantle the deep state. And then there are at least two, maybe more, recent British prime ministers who've railed against the British deep state. And the term is used regularly in British Parliament now. So does that mean it's stopped being a conspiracy theory? because it's now no longer the discourse of the disempowered and the alienated and the disenfranchised, but actually a kind of almost acceptable, analytical, albeit polemically analytical term for describing the workings of modern states. I suppose it was prompted by Cunhull's very interesting theoretical paper, but thinking of Golbin as well, precisely because in Turkey, deep state in particular,
Yes.
has a long history and doesn't have quite that association with the fringes and the peripheries and the disempowered. So maybe you'd be able to respond as well.
You're right. In Turkey, deep state discussion is a long-term history, and different to the group in power or the ideological differentiations, the meaning of the deep state changes in Turkey. For example, who is in charge finds out the enemy of itself as the deep state, and for this one in Turkey. Conspiracy theory, when I first tried to study it, it explored because of the government in Turkey, which is in charge for 20 years, because particularly in Gezi movements, maybe you have heard about it. There are Gezi movements in 2013 in Turkey. Even the highest authority, the prime minister at that time, talk about the Gezi movement with conspiracy theories and explain to the whole society with conspiracy theories. And we see when people in charge at the top has the conspiracy mentality, they transform the society to this conspiracy mentality, and nothing scientific can find place in such society, unfortunately.
I would say, like in the most shortest way possible to answer, say a catastrophe is what occurs. To be frank, I would say I don't know. Like deep state is interesting because I don't want to sound like a conspiracy like myself, but I think there is like a slight element of truth of like where it is born out of, right? Because like I would say, I don't know, like looking at historical examples of like I don't know, say like the CIA and it's like operations in South America or something, right? Like that, that is effectively what they kind of are implying with like deep state things, or like maybe I don't know, like career bureaucrats and like certain governments and like sort of like continued legacies of like that sort of thing. So I say like that one is, I guess, a little bit exceptional, super ironic, especially like the American example right now, because what I would consider is the deep state in the United States are these insane special interests that own, that either employ lobbyists or themselves are lobbyists, and then therefore manipulate Congress in a way that is objectively not in the interest of the American people. But I'd say like another one that like really comes to mind, I'd say the most dangerous one that's happened recently, besides maybe climate change, is like of course like during the pandemic and vaccine skepticism, and that got people killed. Like that caught many people killed because they were led to believe or saw things online or like whatever, read all these things that were completely untrue. And objectively, it got people, it caused tangible harm to society. So I think it is a really massive issue that, we're not obviously have to tackle. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, I'm not sure how we go about that, to be frank. Like I think it's something that I personally think starts with education. I think about instilling and making more robust like critical thinking skills and like certain parts of education, especially. I think that's where it started. At the same time, you can't like re-educate people who aren't in school anymore. So I think it's a really pervasive issue. I think it transcends borders. And yeah, I think we're barreling towards catastrophe, especially in the climate context.
I think we have time for one more question.
Maybe one more question. So like for the far left guy, Do Pericek. So basically he was a Maoist in 1970s. Then in the 1990s, he became a Kemalist and nationalist, like what we call neo-nationalist. It is mainly because he was anti-Kurdish. So like main reason why he became more revisionist in the Turkish socialist left, because he didn't align with the Kurdish people. He preferred to be like more in a more Kemalism, in a more mainstream ideology of nationalism in Turkey. So I wonder if you came across with an anti-Kurdish or I don't know, like anti-Kurdish discourse with regard to environment. Because in our case, we saw with it, like we said together, but it didn't come from the far left party. It was mainly from the far right. So I wonder if you saw these, like in the Doğu Perinçek's party's discourse or in discourse himself, did you come across with these discourses with regard to nationalism, environment, and climate change denialism?
Not see in Doğu Perinçek's rhetoric any anti-Kurdish discourse, but I can add to this, not anti-climate, but I talked earlier about the climate change. There is the ultra-nationalist party leader, Ümit Özdağ, talks about a nationalist danger about Turkey, that if climate change continues like this, then there will be a series migration problems about Turkey. Many people may cross to Anatolia or may stay in Anatolia. Maybe sometimes not anti-climate, but climate change supporters might have nationalist outbursts about the climate change, but it's sometimes different.
When I wrote that eco-bordering concept in my literature, like I thought of Ümit Özdağ, for instance, because he's also afraid of the immigration, like climate change related immigration, and the current immigration to Turkey as well. So mixing the feelings.
His main focus is that,
Yeah.
but I did not see anti-Kurdish in far left movement.
Thank you.
Just one comment to Sergey. I was thinking when you were talking about the kind of the style of the post, I think there's a useful concept of cynical disinhibition that is discussed in the book about Russian political communication, the way how Putin discusses various matters of current affairs with certain distance, but also with certain satire and irony. I think it would be useful to frame the way how bots talk about really important things, but downplay the urgency and the danger. So I think that would be quite useful to use. Okay, if we don't have any further questions, let's thank again our panelists. And let's take a short break, 15, well, currently 13 minutes to end time. And at 5:30, we shall start with the keynote. Thank you. Look forward to that.
Just a small request, please reuse your water glasses if you have them, because we're a little bit short. No, we have more glasses, but still.
I've been reusing it all day. See, it's about climate change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah, I'll
you're right that there is a difference between.
Let's talk about it.
Is unusual. It's a sort of theory.
Can I have a question?
It's the one of which all theories in some ways are.
So what do you think, like,
are
we have
variants,
this
because
kind of,
it's
we entertain the idea of
if
maybe
if
kind of
if
pushing it
it's
together.
to state that everything is
Well, I
connected,
mean, we don't exist,
deep
but do
state,
you think they might
yes, the
become
conspiracy theories are
overlaps and
connected,
you
and
would
they're
be able
connected
to
to
do a
this
joint paper?
deep state, which is because it's so
Yeah.
vague and has to kind of bend with the wind, or is it the fact that she's managing to smuggle it in and make and sort of normalize it and gradually kind of bring it to the fore? And
I think that's actually probably more likely,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah.
I think that she is. That's the thing. It's like I think when you look at like Kiku and like what was his name, like Faisal and like Day and obviously Trump, and then you've got I'm trying to think called I forget the guy in the Netherlands.
oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, Keert Wilders.
Yeah, it's like, I always forget his name, with the goofy hair.
Yeah,
like he, all of them, I'm like, like they're not really the most, like they're not exactly the brain trust, are they? Right? But like Maloney, like she is terrifying because she's got that ideology and she's really, really clever and like, really knows how to play the game. So we had we do an interview series here, and so I'll interview whoever we have to come. And we had there was Alexander Clarkson, so he's at KCL London. And basically, we talked all about the the German elections and whatnot, or whatever. And he made a really interesting point when I asked him about it. He basically said, like, look, I think that AfD could capture like the sort of like Turkish diaspora in Germany if they just shifted their rhetoric a little bit, and they would absolutely wipe the floor with the other parties. Like they would get 40%, like they go nuts. And I was like, that's terrifying me, because if they do figure that out at some point, what's stopping them? And then you kind of have, I wouldn't say like
Trump managed some of that, didn't he?
Oh, completely.
Surprisingly, with the Latin, some of the Latin American communities.
Certainly, and I think but I think again, like I don't think that's necessarily due to like Trump being like some kind of political genius. I think that's more based on like him playing upon literally decades of terrible like lack of immigration reform. There's all these other issues, because like the one thing that always really strikes me so starkly or so strongly when I look at like old the George the original George Bush Senior speeches about immigration, how like the Republican was in the late 1980s compared to 10 years after that, like how far they went just into like the demonization, the scapegoating, and whatever. Not that it wasn't ever not there before, but yeah, it was just. It's like that's something that it's like. So I also thought as well. I was like, if Trump loses this, this election, right? I was like, who's coming next? That's what always scared me. Is like, because someone is just going to go, okay, I can see the mantle.
You might get somebody who's actually articulate and knows what they're doing.
It appears like something in election, whatever, but not like too alienating. I don't know.
It doesn't happen.
I don't want to keep from wine if I can eat.
Do with a tea or something. I'm not one for wine at this time. Are you having? Is that what they've got wine?
Yeah, they've got wine now. Yeah, that's what we.
Oh right.
It's a running joke.
Maybe I'll talking about this time.
So yeah, it is still quite relevant.
And that's what she did last time. It's one of the slated. Yeah, so they kind of complain with that services are not. It's daunting.
I think talked about this yesterday, but it brings a bit different line in the sense of if you live in a big city and then it goes to damage to the world like options and like this and that, and then your discussions are stuff like we want to be part.
No, I mean we can completely miscalculate where we put in ourselves.
It happens to us in Chile, like have a more circle of patients or something like that. They're nice people, but one of them works at the cafe there, the other one factor company and whatnot, and they are not the most intelligent conversation.
Yeah, but then for that matter, you need to be somewhere in Richmond. But then at the same time, what are you going to discuss with
Thank you for your.
No, sure.
Yeah,
but I don't want
to like.
I want let's keep professional.
I would love.
Yeah, but again, it really depends on the neighborhood.
I'm not.
And especially here, I mean, but then more or less everywhere now,
Give me 5 minutes, like halfway through.
Well,
If I would have like glossed over most of them.
No, I think just
going to the end, really. I'm just saying,
like seriously.
oh my god, sorry, so nervous.
at the positive side at some point.
My friends,
It's a learning program you have to get.
but the only reason I would say is like,
If you know someone
I
who-
explain it about the thing, right? Is like the reason why I like chose that specific like framework is like, that's why I would love to like about this, like really. Kind of like struck out to me, not that I like just because
Or the postdoc.
I mean, I don't mind a little bit of nepotism.
to me, the reason why like it kind of
Or I can get a big run and get
Okay.
like in particular.
Yeah.
Like, at least for me, like, I don't know
It's a criteria.
like,
It takes me time to interview.
like literally from when I was
Yeah,
a
well,
small
I think
child,
it's a full-time
we
job.
had like climate change.
Yeah.
She could have.
And then it was over and over again.
There was a
When I found that study and I saw that discrepancy, because at first I was like, oh, it's gonna be older people who are not, right? I was like, it has to be.
No,
And then it
department,
was like,
former postdoc.
She was looking for it.
She got a big grant. Yes,
It's like,
She got it. Oh,
Yeah.
I was reviewing it.
Oh, really?
because
300.
I should put it on
more
my.
likely to do it.
So you should put it in Twitter.
Age in that, and that's why I
put that in
changed
Twitter.
that.
Yeah, I have, and I thought it was successful. So,
My feedback
the
is,
contribution.
well, that's not fair because I have to review a grant for people who are never gonna get them.
And method. But when you get one, you need to jump about it.
Lucky you. Okay. Yeah, it takes one word, successful.
Exactly.
And then in the subconscious of somebody,
But
it will be like, oh,
exactly. But don't you think that Steph wouldn't have done that?
oh, for sure.
Okay. Well, sure. That's through Whistle, you know. And that's the money that came to Sheffield. So.
Yeah,
I'd say this also.
We have- we have to thank you for the job that you saved.
Yeah.
My master's like. Like,
Okay, let's do this. Last round.
Shall we ask everyone to?
Yeah, personal responsibility.
I'll do another round.
Public.
So shall I introduce you or Anton?
You're closer to the stage.
Dynamic as well, just in a sense of like.
Will you be sitting?
That's
Will you be sitting? Will you stand up and walk?
Everyone else sets, so I will.
Are you in a lecture mode or in a conference panels mode? That's probably is the question.
I mean, I adapt to your demands, you know. Wherever you.
I love Central and Eastern Europe. There's a lot of flexibility around everything, you know. No rituals, nothing.
Oh, there's always ritual. There's always ritual. Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody knows.
Oh, that was nice.
Should I mention points? Okay.
Yeah, of course, I mean, the reason I.
Yeah, sure.
Piece of,
Sure.
one item.
Right, shall we crack on? And I'm very pleased to have Petr Kreko, our dear colleague with whom a lot of us used to collaborate, regularly discuss various things that happen in Hungary and around the world. Petr is currently, as you see, has various affiliations with leading universities in the region, including CU. Petr is a social psychologist and political scientist who is working on the issues of disinformation, political communication, and some of you might also know Peter by his work at Political Capital organization. And we are very pleased to have you here to wrap up our workshop with your talk about climate disinformation. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shia, and thanks a lot for having me here at this conference. I was really honored on the one hand when I was asked to deliver a keynote. I was, if I'm honest to you, was a bit surprised as well, in the sense that I do not regard myself as an expert of climate skepticism and climate disinformation as such. By the way, there are not so many. I mean, I think apart from the people who are in this room, I think there is literally really few. But I'm doing research on disinformation and conspiracy theories for, oh my God, 1 decade and a half. So I started way before it was cool. So maybe it was the reason why I was asked. But I'm really happy to share a few insights. Please feel free to disagree with whatever I'm going to say. And what I would like to do is to raise a few points on from the social psychological perspective. I mean, what explains climate denial, climate skepticism. There seems to be a bit of irony in the fact that this, I mean, when it comes to, let's say, political disinformation, we tend to believe in conspiracy theories and fake news that are really beyond our everyday lives. So that's the QAnon conspiracy theories. So the the deep state is conspiring in order to run a pedophile ring in the US administration. So it does not have any effect on your life practically. But climate denial and skepticism is definitely different because we literally feel it on our skin. And it seems that the more we feel it on our skins, the more we trend to deny it. And I try to explain a bit what is a possible solution to or explanation to this contradiction. So I will talk a bit about the social psychology of climate denial, climate skepticism, climate anxiety, motivated rejection of science that I think all of you are aware of, but it's just good to remind ourselves. Role of COVID-19 that I regard was a big booster for climate skepticism. I will talk a bit about climate skepticism and agnotology that came, I mean, some of you have touched upon in your presentations, and bit of the geopolitical context and future trends. So let's speculate about how sustainable is climate disinformation? So it's, and also for everyone in the room who is doing research on climate disinformation, this is a crucial question. Like, will our topic disappear or will it stay with us? And then I would share a few thoughts, but rather, I mean, quoting others' work here and some of mine on possible counter strategies. Sorry, I would stay seated for the reason that I have to push two buttons. One for you to see that change. The other one is for me to see my screen. So first of all, how important is the whole topic for the European public? If we take a look at the latest Eurobarometer poll and look at the overall European data, we can see that environment and climate change is the fifth most important topic, but let's say it's half of as important for the European public, or was in autumn 2024, then the most important topic, the war in Ukraine. So 15% of Europeans have mentioned it from a closed list as one of the two most important issues Europe faces at the moment. So it's relatively important. In the last years, I did not bring any time series data here, but in the last years, it have remained mainly constant. There was a bit of spike, I think, in 2018-19, so around the rise of the Fridays for Future, maybe a bit earlier, but it's mostly in the last years it was stagnating. How much? Most of the studies show that hardcore climate denialism is rather rare in Europe, at least. So if you ask statements that climate change does not exist and it's just a hoax, you mostly have less than 10% of respondents in European population agree with this statement. But when it comes to, oh my God. Climate lukewarmism at the EU. So climate lukewarmism is when is the thought that it exists, climate, but it's most part caused by natural cycles rather than human activities. So I'm honored and proud to mention that Hungary is the leader in this list. It's also a Eurobarometer survey from back to 2021, and the data shows an interesting patterns. Take a look at the list of the first countries. So it's like the blue line is the ones who regard it true. And also in Hungary, I have to say that there is only 1 percentage point advantage of climate lukewarmism against the ones who think that disagree with this statement. But all the first countries are from Central Eastern Europe. So Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Poland, Lithuania, Slovenia, then comes Italy. Most of the Nordic countries are usually at the bottom, and as we go to the west and the north, we find lower agreement with this statement. And in Portugal, we can see really low levels. Portugal, we can see it in other research as well that seems to, maybe because of its geography, seems to be a country that is not that receptive to climate disinformation. But I would say that this is, I would not say it's a perfect indicator of receptivity to climate disinformation, but at least some indicator. And also, I mean, the differences are huge, I think. So this is also important to mention. So in Portugal, 13% of the population, in Hungary, 84% of the population agrees with this statement. So huge gaps. Again, I think we have to be also cautious when coming up with overgeneralizing statements on how humans in general think about these things, because we can see that psychology can be similar, but the occurrence and the averages are quite different in different countries. You all know this. I just wanted to put it here to point on the facts that in the last bit more than 100 years, 130 years, there was a more than 1.5 Celsius point global change, average change of temperature. So this is an existing stuff, and maybe it is also the reason why this open climate denialism is more rare in the European Union. But but as we could see, softer versions are omnipresent in many societies. When it comes to climate anxiety, in the European Social Survey, we can see that climate anxiety is rather a strong sentiment. It's a measure from 2020, 2022. If you are more interested.
You didn't change the slide.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, this is what okay, thank you. So 43% of participants in the European Social Survey in the 2020-2022 wave felt very worried or extremely worried about climate change. You can see again that the differences are big, not as big as in the previous one, but it's mostly the inverse of what we could see in the previous graph. Portugal is on the top with the most worries. Lithuania, Iceland, Poland. No, I think it's a bit different. But Central Eastern European countries, they have rather bit lower figures of anxiety, but it's much more present. It's present in most of the European countries. And what we can see is that higher levels of education come together with more anxiety. for some reasons, because it's interesting. Usually youngsters are more interested about climate change, but we can see that 60, 69 years old are most likely to be ready. If you're more interested in climate anxiety, there is one expert here in the room, Lily Jakubowicz, my colleague, who wrote her dissertation in a topic that is connected to that, just as an asterisk. And she helped me to put together some of the slides that I'm talking about. Yeah. And the nature of climate anxiety is that compared to clinical anxiety that we usually regard as a bad thing, eco-anxiety can be regarded as a healthy reaction to the threat of climate change if it does not lead to a fear that paralyzes us, of course. But because if it leads fear to paralyze us, then it can become counterproductive. But if we feel strong anxiety, we need some coping mechanisms, which can be, in this case, problem-focused solving, taking action, confrontation, facilitating action. It can be avoidance and acceptance. So it's an existing thing. I cannot do anything about that. So it's like it's a bit of fatalism. It can be optimism. We can do it together. The humankind have so many problems in the world. We will get over this one as well, or seeking social support as well, which can be, of course, beneficial, but both taking action for managing emotions. Climate anxiety can be as beneficial as it can encourage people to act, but without clear solutions, cognitive dissonance can appear. And cognitive dissonance can drive us to believe in explanations that question the importance of the whole topic or question the whole topic itself. Usually, what we can see in the European or the global public opinion as well, to a certain extent, is that there is a strong public message and strong anxiety. We could see that in Europe, 43% of the respondents claim that they are anxious about the climate change. We could also see that it is regarded to be a rather important topic. If we feel that this is a huge problem, but we also feel that we ourselves cannot really do anything about that, and let's be honest to ourselves, everyday citizens have a limited room for action in challenging this trend, then we can go into many ways on how to solve this cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is that either this problem exists and I do nothing about it, or this problem exists but I do and I try to do nothing about it, but I even don't believe that I can solve it. So you can always change how you interpret the action. For example, climate cannot be important since I and others are doing nothing about it. What is important from our perspective is that cognitive dissonance can create a perfect fertile ground for messages of doubt about climate change. So, and this is where we don't have to blame or don't have to label soft forms of climate skepticism, I think, as mere stupidity, because if we have a problem that we think will just deteriorate, and we also feel that we ourselves cannot do too much about that, then of course we need some calm and some additional information that makes us a bit less anxious. And it can be that it's not that important, or it does not even exist, or it's a natural thing, we cannot do anything about it. So there was an ice age, so this is the natural heat cycle of the Earth, and so on. What can we do to avoid social dissonance? We can adjust our attitudes to conform with others, and we can also see that there has been a backlash in climate attitudes since about 2007. So this is one thing where I think we don't really have the right to blame everyone, not as if anyone did it in the room, but it's in the discourses that usually appear that, why people do not believe in such overwhelming scientific evidence, it must be because of their lack of knowledge. And I think that it can be because of the cognitive dissonance, because this contradiction we feel in ourselves, that there is a danger, but we can do nothing about that. But also it can be motivated rejection of science, which is a term that is invented by Stephen Lewandowski and Klaus Oberauer. And they claim, their approach is that most of the rejection of science is not by stupidity. It's not because of lack of education. It's not because of lack of knowledge, but because rejection of certain scientific knowledge can be just better for us because it fits better our worldview. And their classical explanation is that so people tend to reject findings that threaten their core beliefs and worldview, and their main example for this phenomenon is that what they found is that greater knowledge, higher education, higher scientific knowledge and scientific literacy decreased the acceptance of climate denial statements among liberals, but increased it at conservatives. So what does it mean? It means that if a conservative, a strongly partisan conservative, knows more about the world, has higher intellect, has higher education, has higher scientific literacy, then he or she will use all his or her knowledge to defend climate skeptic, climate denialist views. So if we deeply believe in something that intellect does not help us to get through, that it can just amplify. And if someone is, I think you all know, very well-educated, very sophisticated conspiracy theorists who can defend every argument they have, well written, some of them, can even have a strong university background and they use all their knowledge to defend quite absurd statements. So motivated rejection science is on the rise, and it's especially on the rise in the United States, where we can see that environmental issues are one of the most polarizing issues in the public and also in the House and the Senate, in the Congress. You can see here how votes between Democrats and Republicans on environmental issues evolved since the early 80s, when the gap was much smaller, both in the House, the light lines, and both in the Senate, the darker lines, and this gap just grown significantly, where currently less than 20% of the Republicans tend to vote to climate-related proposals in the House or the Senate floor. So polarization is driving motivated rejection of science. Therefore, polarization is on the rise in not just in United States, but in other parts of the world. Therefore, we can expect that this issue will be even more polarized in Europe as well. I have so according to some observers, and even there is a bit of scientific evidence on that. COVID denial have boosted climate denial big time. And there, we could also observe that COVID denials, COVID conspiracies shifting focus to climate skepticism. And also there were a few specific conspiracy theories that become particularly very popular among COVID skeptics who then turned to climate skeptics. And one of them was the 15 minutes cities, which is 15-minute cities, correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is mainly about to have things close to your neighborhood, therefore you don't have to necessarily use your car. You can, but you don't have to. But this has become for many COVID skeptics who've seen the COVID lockdowns as the a great tyrannical movement of increasingly totalitarian states that want to control more their citizens as a post-COVID solution to keep up this control. So 15 minutes, they have seen the 15-minute cities as practically a new wave of lockdown, and we could see that Jordan Peterson and other high-level, highly influential public intellectuals have also used it as an essential threat to individual freedom and individual liberty. So I think what is common between COVID. Yeah, what is a bit common between COVID and climate skepticism? Both are about the dictatorial oppression of the central government, and I would say that both COVID skepticism and climate skepticism justifies itself by a new wave of libertarian rhetorics and libertarian attitudes. It's like don't let the state to tell you if you have to stay at home, if you have to wash your hands, if you have to vaccinate yourself, if you have to wear masks, if you can use hot water for doing a bath, or if you can eat meat, if you can use your car, and so on and so on. And I think it's a powerful narrative, and I think it's embedded in this broader trend that the far right, in a very, very bizarre manner, the authoritarian far right paints itself today, and rather, I think, successfully, as the main defender of individual liberties and the main defender of freedom. And I think for that purpose, both COVID and climate skepticism was quite successful, and we could observe a shift from previous COVID skeptics when COVID was over to climate skepticism, even outright denialism. Climate disinformation is also a perfect example of agnotology. So this term agnotology means, and maybe it was you, Anton, who referred to this book already, of Naomi Oreskes and Eric Cambe on Merchants of Tao. So the term agnotology labels the science practical or the practices of destroying knowledge. So how to make people more uncertain about the things that they thought they previously knew. And as they coin, manufacture doubt, the deliberate alteration and misrepresentation of knowable facts and empirical evidence to promote an agenda, often for financial benefits. And I think it was also you, Anton, who mentioned already the tobacco industry. It was also the coal industry, also sugar production companies in the United States. There were advertisements that said that eat more sugar, it will be better for your health. Fat is evil, but sugar is all good. And so this manufacturing doubt means that if you thought that you know something, and if you thought that this is a fact, for example, that smoking is bad for your health, that sugar will make you fat, and things like that, they just start to raise doubt about that, mostly by inspiring debate about these issues. It was also the strategy of the vaccine skeptic movement in the United Kingdom, and the Anglo-Saxon media have pretty much followed this line. So you put a doctor and a vaccine skeptic in the same debate, and then what will the audience see is that, okay, I mean, there is a debate there, so there must be no facts. It's just on the debate. So they, and this is what they've done in a very conscious manner in the era of climate change as well. And as Anton also said, there has been so-called experts who jumped from defending the tobacco industry to jumping to defending the fossil fuel industry. And in a study, there are a few tools mentioned which you can do if you want to manufacture distrust, and if you want to manufacture doubt. You can attack the study design of a certain attack. So there is a study that comes out that proves that climate change is an existing thing and it's caused by humans. Then you can attack the study design. It's always a comfortable way. Gain support from reputable individuals. This is what, and this book comes up with some quite striking examples. I think the fossil fuel movement also could recruit one previous nuclear scientist, a very reputable nuclear scientist who was unquestionably a scientific authority in nuclear energy. He was much less in the impact of fossil fuels and global warming, but because of he was a reputable scientist in one field, he could be the reputable speaker of another field as well. Misrepresent data, employ hyperbolical absolutist language, or influence government and laws. And this is what we are going to see just more of. Yeah, what to expect? So I think I will just claim the obvious here. Please come up with some maybe more original ideas. Anti-green movement is becoming practically official, and rise of populist right is also boosting climate skepticism. And I think climate skepticism was more of an Anglo-Saxon import in Europe beforehand, but especially after the COVID, it gained ground, and it have created its own information ecosystem. Populist right has become the defender of freedom, and this is something that Stephen Hutchins and Anton has also referred to. They are posing as fighters against tyranny, and they are the ones who can mainstream the ideas of climate skepticism with far-right parties. It's gaining a considerable weight in the European politics. In the European Parliament, for example, the far-right parties altogether have more mandates than the center-right EPP. More than 25% of the votes are going to these parties, and most of them, to different extent, but represent some kind of climate skepticism or even outright climate denialism. United States will in the United States, we can see that the trends are not definitely helpful for the how to say to fight climate denialism and climate skepticism in the future. I think there is this prey mentality or predator mentality of the U.S. administration. It was former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who, for example, even published a paper on how United States can benefit from the melting of the ice in the Arctic and how it can help them to take out more minerals, more energy from the earth. Yeah, so climate change is not necessarily regarded to be so besides climate skepticism or climate denialism that is omnipresent in the US administration and the MAGA camp, you can also see a mentality that thinks that climate change is by the end of the day a good thing, because if we can have controls, and some talks have started between the Russians and the Americans about the Arctic as well. So if we can control huge parts of the Arctic, then the less ice we have there, the better it is. Also, what is, I think, important to mention is that the social media companies, as a result of the US elections, are changing their policies. Meta have terminated their cooperation with fact checkers in the US. I think it will come in Europe as well. Content moderation policies are suspended, downplayed, terminated. So we definitely will see more disinformation in the social media space, and it will clearly have an impact on climate disinformation as well. And yeah, a few more terms on what's happening in the US. How much time do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. I will finish it by that. So this is a famous picture, and yeah, in one of the previous presentations, yeah, you mentioned that this brilliant argument that often comes up with US response, with US in US discourses.
I think you can just click on the screen.
Thank you. That if there is snow somewhere, then it's outright proof that climate change does not exist. When I was in the US in 2016, 2017, whenever I switched on Fox News and there was some heavy snowing somewhere, Fox News reporters went around and asked the people on the streets that, are you really worried about climate change? And the responses were, yeah, we wish we had more climate change because it's like so cold. So in 2015, one of the Republican senators, Jim Inhofe, brought a snowball into the House of the Senate to show it as an evidence that climate change is just a hoax. And in the approach of the new US government, it's not only the question of gaining more resources, drill baby drill, but also this has become practically an identity issue. As I think it was mentioned in some earlier presentations as well. So when you can read an executive order on the website of the White House that Donald Trump's end the procurement and forced use of paper straws, then you feel that this is not a marginal topic. And again, let's take a look at the wording: forced use of paper straws against tyrannical green dictatorship. They want to impose on you habits that you have to fight against. Yes, US withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, and of course, the his new energy secretary, who, by the way, at the Senate confirmation hearing, he told that climate change is not a hoax, so he changed his mind a bit. But these trends are all predicting that in the US, we could see how divisive climate change has already become, but it will become a climate change. It will become an even more divisive issue. The question is that is it good news or a bad news for Europe? And I would rather argue that it might be a good news, in the sense that as even some of the far-right leaders, like Marine Le Pen, fear that they have to distance themselves from this US administration that treats Europe not just a rival, but practically as an enemy, maybe what happens in the United States is not going to be a positive indicator, but a counter indicator of what happens in the future in Europe. So the more US goes into climate denialism and the more US turns against Europe, I think the less impact and direct, how to say, modal transfer it can provide for Europe. Yeah, and finally, a few thoughts about what can be done about climate disinformation. I think I will jump this over. Yeah. Sorry. So we had some research, but it's not climate specific on what to do about certain kinds of disinformation. Our findings, I think one finding we had that might be important as a tool generally for fighting disinformation and fake news and immunizing people was that what we found is that if we put the subjects, the experimental subjects or the participants of an experiment in a role, then they have to teach someone else, their friends, their relatives. They have to explain, for example, that why climate change denialism is false. So let's imagine an experimental setting, but it's not like that. The teacher tells you or the experts tells you that climate change denialism is false. But you receive a text that has some points that elaborate on this issue, and then you have to write a letter to your friend, to your grandma, and so on. We use different instructions, and you will first persuade yourself by getting involved into the debunking process. Second, if you are not taken out of this student role, that I think is often a big obstacle of any anti-disinformation project, that I'm the fact checker, I'm the expert, I'm the egghead telling you how you have to think, but you involve somehow the participant and you make them experts, make them teachers. I think so. We found that it can be highly efficient. These kind of interventions on adolescent but also adult samples. But let's take a look at 6 strategies for reducing or the damaging effects of climate skepticism. So this is something that Lewandowski, the author of the previous article on motivated rejection of science that I mentioned, and Matthew Hornsey came up with. So they propose 6 strategies appealing to skeptics through value-based frames. So it says that if you use the frames of your political opponents, for example, when you talk about climate change, you do not necessarily refer the future generations and the responsibility for the humankind and so on, because conservatives, they will think that it's all bullshit. But you what the hell is happening here? Okay, but you say that but you appeal to more to conservative values. That this is our national tradition. We have to defend that. Then it can be partially successful. Or you can appeal to skeptics through co-benefits. For example, if you say, I think even for an outright climate change denier, that we can give you free solar panels that you can put on your house, and then your heating will be free, then I think they will consider the option. And you can change them through their behavior, their attitudes. Leveraging climate-friendly actors with the conservative movement is the best thing, of course, if you have some conservative spokesperson of the climate change program. So, for example, if Donald Trump would tell the MAGA camp that climate change is a huge problem, it would be much more efficient. And of course, this is a nice idealistic approach, but in an increasingly polarized environment, these are the guys that you don't find. Establishing norms, consensus messaging. According to some studies, and I think it's interesting because it sounds a rather cheap argument, to be frank, but the message that 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change is happening, it can be persuasive for the ones who are not hardcore climate deniers and the ones who are not hardcore believers of conspiracy theories, because of course if you think that all the scientists are in the pocket of the, let's say, Chinese industry, then you won't take this argument. But how we can find this manufactured doubt that based on the perception that there is a debate around climate issues and we just don't know what's true or not, is this consensus messaging. And okay, I think I will stop here. And he also sent me a friendly gesture that it's time for me to stop. So thanks a lot for your attention. I know that my presentation was not coherent in every sense, but any questions or reaction are absolutely welcome. And I would just invite you to think together about what could happen with climate change denialism. So my response to the question that I posed at the beginning, that how sustainable is climate disinformation, I would say very sustainable. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Peter. And we opening the floor for questions, please. Anton.
Peter, how do you, with these far-right movements, it seems to me that there is some sort of divide in, the West European far right and the far right in Central Europe. In Central Europe, where in Central Europe you do find maybe less of that rhetoric, this libertarian rhetoric. There is more, I guess, of the aspects of the need for sort of the state patronizing its citizens, or backing the citizens and helping the citizens. I remember during the COVID times, Orban and Fidesz was actually not in the camp of the COVID negationists, or they used the COVID-19 pandemic in order to strengthen the authoritarian core of the rhetoric, of the discourse, closing the borders. Well, it's an emergency. Now we have to respond, and it was completely different with, say, parties such as Alternative for Germany, right? So where exactly you have this, libertarian idea. Well, like in the US, don't threaten me, sort of, leave me alone, the state. But in Central Eastern Europe, I think it was a bit, different. Do you think that similar trends can be found or I don't know observed in relation to climate change skepticism that people in Central Europe would probably think because of maybe cultural influences coming from the Cold War when it was the socialist government that you rely on the state to protect you even from climate change, while in the West it was the far right would be more of a individualistic.
Yeah, it's a very good point. In Hungary, the Fidesz, for example, was never outright in outright denial of COVID. Neither they try to how to say relativize it or there were. It's just sorry to say this way, but it was a fucked up policy that they followed. But it was totally inefficient with the Chinese vaccines and so on. But it was not based on any statement that it is not a danger or Orban definitely did not use any libertarian rhetoric in that sense. On the other hand, the extreme right, Our Homeland movement in Hungary, that could get into the parliament in 2022 with a lockdown, with an anti-lockdown and COVID skeptic and anti-vaccine campaign, they use these libertarian arguments, and it's really the place where you would expect it's the most. So it's a post-fascist party, practically, highly authoritarian and so on. They want to castrate homosexuals, for example. But but the state shouldn't tell us that if we have to stay at home or if we have to and they use this climate, this libertarianish argumentation in the climate world as well. But I think you're right that in Central Eastern Europe, I think what is a more dominant argument, especially for parties on power like Fidesz, but also for Fico and others, is that this all green ideology is highly dangerous because it can let us without any energy. Look at what the Germans did. They deprived themselves of Russian gas, they deprived themselves of nuclear energy, and then you have a problem. So I think it's rather securitized, this issue. But you're right that, especially from partisan government, this libertarian element is less prevalent or this rhetoric is less prevalent in Eastern Europe than in Western Europe. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, please.
So it's kind of obvious that there is this division between conservatives or right-leaning people versus liberals or left-leaning people on this specific subject. But is this because of the subject itself, climate change, or this is because the general confrontation between the left and the right, between the conservatives and the liberals? Because historically, we know and we see that conservatives were adopting some of the liberal policies on voting rights, on social welfare state, and so on. The liberals did the same with some economic aspects, but they're not doing it on climate change. So is this because of the subject, or again, this is in the whole general confrontation between the two sides?
Your question is about the United States, right?
In general, because we do also see it in Europe a little bit, but yeah, more on the United States.
Mm-hmm. I think, good question. So your question is about that this is just a war zone of an already polarized political landscape, or the issue is polarizing in itself, therefore it divides people into camps. I think, let's say 30 years ago, it was much less a topic back then, it's right, but it was much less divisive. I think it become more divisive, and figures indicate that as well in the last decade, maybe. And I think in the US, as I said, it's rather speculative, but I think that climate skepticism rather arrived in Europe as a US export. And in the US, a big player of this whole field, and this is what Anton have talked about, was the fossil fuel industry that paid an awful lot of money to Republican candidates. It was before the beside the National Rifle Association was among the biggest donors, while the big donors of the Democrat camp was the green industry. And I think it definitely contributed to this divide. And yeah, I think I cannot really draw how to say historic trend in that, but I think it have become, yeah. Also, I think this divide that this is about our liberties is a bit of U.S. export. U.S. import from the United States in Europe, and I think it started to resonate more after the experiences of COVID, when I think we underestimate how huge impact COVID had on our political systems. In Austria, I think the success of the Austrian Freedom Party was partially because they could have a huge boost at the COVID times. AfD also still uses the experience of COVID and the lockdowns as a negative experience that, okay, this is how badly a state can treat you. And I think it's a post-COVID symptom, a psychological and political post-COVID syndrome as well, that this overall approach, that this negative sentiments towards the state that can decide over you, and the negative sentiments towards the scientists who say that you better to stay at home, you vaccinate yourself. So this anti-elitist, anti-scientist, populist sentiment, I think, just resonates well since then.
Please, more questions?
Let's have
What's the role of the big tech in this? Because we know that all the social media very much exploiting various psychological elements of people. So where would you put the effect of social media and the big tech in this process?
Brilliant question again. I think it definitely plays a role. So there are tons of social psychological evidence on that, how social media plays into polarization and into strengthening political divisions. And I have not read anything in particular about climate change rhetorics, but I'm sure it contributes to polarization at every front, including there. And because it's such an important topic, of course, more important topics are just becoming also more subjects of this polarization. But what Matthew Gansko, who is a bit of skeptical of this idea of the online echo chambers and the filter bubbles and so on. His main argument is that, guys, we meet more with contrarian opinions on the internet and in the social media than in our everyday lives. So do you have the stale debates in your family? Then you can have on the internet, mostly not. So his argument is that the polarization of the US society have more started in the polarization of the news media. And he also says that media is the cause of polarization, and he does not exclude the possibility that social media is cause of the polarization as well. But also it's of course it's a circular causality where more polarization in the media, in the news media and the social media gets people more divided, then it gets politics more divided. But I think it it plays a role. It plays a role, and since of course, it does not prove causality because it's just correlation. But if you take a look at the trends of polarization in the Western world, polarization have definitely become more visible and more deep since social media have become parts of our everyday life.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Really quickly, so going to this like climate lukewarmism, do you see it as a different or a separate issue from like standard just outright denialism? And therefore, if it is different, then we should tackle it differently or try to counter it differently.
Yeah, I think we should. I think we should. It's much more prevalent than outright climate denialism. First, so I think it's simply more important in the sense that it's more present in the public opinion. Second, I think it's the best of middle way. So it's the golden middle way. I'm not a climate skeptic, but I'm also not an environmentalist. I think that it exists, but we don't have anything to do about that. And this is the perfect, denial of our own responsibility, which I think is a quite natural defense and coping mechanism coming from this cognitive dissonance that I talked to you about. How to fight against that, I honestly don't know, but what to do about it. But this is, I think this is the safe option that you can choose without being labeled as a conspiracy theorist, without being labeled as an idiot. But yeah, I think it's on the rise according to polls, and it's much more widespread, and yeah. So I think we have to, and also you have to. It's maybe more difficult to deny as well, right? Because yeah, if you show this graph, that the temperature in the world is on the rise, then it seems like a proof. But how did humans really contribute to that? And I mean, the explanations of climate scientists for that is just more difficult to comprehend. So I think it's definitely a challenge. So it's a good question.
I liked your conclusions, and I think you're quite right to suggest that the way forward is, as your list suggests, a kind of constructive engagement with climate skepticism rather than kind of name calling or exclusion or let alone kind of silencing. So I think that's absolutely right. I wonder whether one goes still further and say that there are actually, whilst the motivations are questionable, there are some genuine concerns that drive climate skepticism that do need to be addressed through policy, whether it's need for a kind of better approach to consultation when you're implementing certain kind of net zero related or climate friendly policies, rolling out waves of wind farms and solar farms without the necessary consultation. I mean, that's just one small area where there might be a kind of better approach to policy. But I suppose the big one is being upfront about the genuine costs of moving to net zero and the need for transfer of resources, whether it's from rich Western countries to global South countries, or whether it's within countries, that allows the country as a whole to live sustainably. And there have been people talking about quite radical policies of like individualized carbon quotas, where everybody or every household has a sort of carbon quota. doesn't mean to say they can't exceed it, and they can't travel 3 times a year by plane instead of 2, but it just means that they have to trade in and buy the extra credits that they need to undertake that travel. And what you get there is you get no impingement of freedom. You get the country living within its sort of carbon limits, and you get a massive transfer of resources from rich to poor. So, you know, maybe there's a need to think more kind of creatively and more radically about changes in policy to address, as I say, some of the genuine concerns that maybe don't drive climate skepticism, but certainly feed it and support it.
Yeah, I don't want to be very cynical here, but I'm just wondering, and I think your question is absolutely legitimate, and I think these tools would be, if it would be used by the politicians and by the educational system and so on, to have an impact on the attitudes of the citizens to go behind climate skepticism, denialism, it would be highly efficient. And in countries where they take it seriously, Nordic countries, for example, you see minuscule levels of climate denialism, but also low levels of climate lukewarmism. The problem, I think, is that in the countries where you have the highest levels of climate skepticism, highest levels of climate skepticism and public opinion is not the cause of climate skeptic political actions, but the consequence. I think more so. I think we have more of a supply problem than a demand problem. And I know it sounds highly anti-democratic, but it's like maybe, it's a question if higher levels of climate skepticism, so are there politicians who feel they have to, abandon climate policies because of strong pressure on voters? I think it's usually the other way around. They have some financial incentives to go with the fossil fuel industry, to go on with policies that are more destructive towards the nature, and then they persuade their electorate that this is the right way to go. It was definitely how it happened in the US and how it happens in the US. And I think it's increasingly how it will happen in Europe as well. And what maybe we have to be more careful of is that how the fossil fuel industry is paying off politicians, than how they persuade the public opinion, because I think this is maybe the core of the problem. And I'm sure there has been many research that showed, for example, that fossil fuel companies have a rather, sophisticated rhetoric when it comes to climate change that never goes to direct denial. But it's like, we have to fulfill the demands of the people, and there is growing energy demand and arguments like that. So, but I think after what happens in the US right now, I can imagine that the fossil fuel industry will, and the more polluting industrial companies will go more rampant and more uninhibited in their public affairs and public relations strategies on reaching out to politicians and also to the but I think it's not, the problem is not mainly with the public opinion, but it's with the politicians who rather spread the climate skeptic views.
Just a comment, a very brief comment. To follow up what you said last, that probably these industries would go even more aggressive. In fact, that conference that I mentioned in London in February this year, I have a list of the people who they invited. It's around 2,000 people that they invited to that conference, and interestingly, also involving some Ukrainian politicians. So they're trying to to cast their net as wide as possible to get on board so many people. and really influence the debate about climate change.
And it was a conference that was organized by the some company. Shell or
There were several fossil companies that were part of the, but I think it's Jordan organized it officially, at least, where he got the money from. Well, I presume from those industries, but this is my hypothesis, so to say.
I think it's time to wrap up because it
And
was a
drink some
very,
wine.
very, very long day. Peter, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Don, would you like to say a few words at the end?
Well, one moment. I need to. Yeah. Yeah, thank you everybody for participating as the panelists and also as the audience. It was I think it was a very good dynamic day. It was very useful for all of us to share ideas and share regional case studies, which I believe many of us would not otherwise know about. The developments in different regions of the world. We hope that we, together with Ilya and Dani, we will be able to produce a special issue of a journal. We don't know yet what.
We have a preliminary agreement
we have,
with
we
one
have
journal,
ideas.
but we're gonna explore alternative options.
Yeah, so you and we will be able to then read these papers in the full exposure and academic exposure. And so thank you again for participating, and we will have dinner.
Yeah, maybe I just intervene with regard to
Yes.
the special issues.
And
So
thank you. Special thank you to our colleague Petar Keko.
And thank you all. Thank you
yes,
for the invitation, and I really enjoyed it. So great thanks to you guys for putting it together.
it was our pleasure. Yeah, so what we've discussed with Alexander and Ton over the break. So we're gonna send an email to everyone who contributed to this workshop sometime early next week with a timeline when to send the drafts of your articles and sort of what would be the rough timeline look like. Just in case to send you the first signal, if you would like to contribute to the special issue, be ready to have your first draft to be submitted early May, because we will have a very tight schedule in order to make it happen until let's say late spring 2026. So there will be a lot of work, but we will make sure it's going to be a stellar special issue. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Akush.
Rubin proposed an idea which I think is very lovely about why not to do a group photo of you quickly somewhere, maybe there actually.
Okay.
If you fancy.